Imagine a man who stands behind a pulpit every Sunday, preaching virtue, promising salvation, and counseling the broken. Now imagine that same man making a decision so reckless, so forbidden, that in one night, his carefully curated life begins to unravel. He thought he was invincible, untouchable, hidden behind his sermons and prayers, but fate had other plans. One reckless choice, one secret encounter, and suddenly, everything he believed about himself, about control, about morality, shattered. He woke up the next morning with a gnawing fear he couldn't pray away. The person beside him wasn't just a stranger, there was a truth buried in their body, a danger he never anticipated. Panic surged through him, cold and unrelenting. He had crossed a line, and now, reality stared him in the face in the most terrifying way possible. Every lie he had told himself, the sermons, the charity, the smiles, crumbled under the weight of one truth. He was no longer just a pastor. He was a man confronted with mortality, with accountability, with consequences he could neither negotiate nor escape. Suddenly, every whispered secret in his past felt louder than ever, echoing with judgment, with fear, with undeniable reality. And as the days passed, the world he had carefully built began to crack. People sensed it, rumors swirled, and he felt eyes on him that weren't there before. But the deepest confrontation wasn't from outside, it came from within. The man in the mirror no longer offered comfort. He saw his mistakes, his impulses, the dangerous mix of arrogance and desire. It was in that dark, desperate moment that something unexpected happened. Fear became clarity. Panic became reflection. He realized that the life he had led, the lies, the pretense, the manipulations, had brought him here. And for the first time he confronted the terrifying reality. Truth has a way of breaking through even the thickest walls of deception. He had a choice: hide, deny, and let his life implode in shame, or face the consequences and confront the person he had become. The path ahead was uncertain, terrifying, and completely his responsibility. Every prayer he had ever offered now demanded sincerity. Every sermon he had delivered now demanded personal reckoning. This wasn't just a story of one reckless night, it was a story of awakening, of reckoning, of transformation born from fear, mistake, and unimaginable exposure. It was the moment when secrets could no longer protect him, and he had no one to save him but himself. The betrayal of trust is a wound that cuts deeper when it comes from someone who has positioned themselves as a moral compass, a guide, a shepherd of souls. When people place their faith in a pastor, they expect integrity, protection, and guidance. They hand over their vulnerabilities, their questions, their hopes, believing that the person speaking to them embodies the virtues they preach. That trust is sacred, invisible yet unbreakable. A bond built on the assumption that those in power will act with care and responsibility. But when that trust is violated, the impact isn't just emotional, it's seismic. It shakes the foundation of belief itself, leaving those affected questioning not only the pastor's character, but the very framework of morality they had relied upon. The betrayal is magnified because it is so personal. This is not a distant figure committing a crime in secrecy, but someone who inhabits the spaces where people feel safe and spiritually nurtured. Every sermon, every counsel, every handshake that once brought comfort is now tainted by suspicion, replaced by the uncomfortable truth that authority does not equal virtue. The mind races to reconcile the person they revered with the person who could commit such an act, creating a cognitive dissonance that is both unsettling and transformative. Trust, once shattered, cannot simply be patched over. It demands reckoning, confrontation, and often painful reflection. It forces communities to question their assumptions, their blind faith, and the mechanisms by which power can corrupt. And for the one who betrayed that trust, the weight is equally crushing. A realization that the admiration, the loyalty, the respect that once surrounded them is gone, replaced by scrutiny, shame, and a profound isolation born from the knowledge that a sacred covenant has been broken. The collision of secret desires with real-world risks is a force that often moves silently, but with devastating impact. When someone allows forbidden impulses to guide their actions, they are stepping into a zone where fantasy and consequence meet, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Desire, in its raw form, can be intoxicating, blinding, and deceptively urgent, convincing the mind that rules, morality, and caution are temporary inconveniences, rather than necessary boundaries. Yet, the real world is indifferent to temptation. It does not pause for a lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. One night, one decision, one surrender to desire can set off a chain of events that is impossible to undo. The allure of secrecy often intensifies the thrill, masking the dangers that accompany it, until the consequences arrive with a force that cannot be ignored. In situations where health, trust, or safety is involved, the collision is particularly acute. Suddenly, what seemed like a private indulgence becomes a public reckoning, a threat to life, reputation, and relationships. Fear and regret creep in, often simultaneously, as the reality of exposure, contamination, or harm becomes unavoidable. The mind scrambles to justify, to rationalize, to minimize, but rationalization has no power against tangible consequences. This is the cruel paradox of secret desires. They promise satisfaction but deliver risk, sometimes in the most personal and irreversible ways. The moment of collision forces a confrontation with responsibility, morality, and the fragility of human decision-making. It strips away illusions of control, revealing that actions taken in private can ripple outward with profound effects, leaving a permanent mark on everyone involved. In this intersection of impulse and consequence, there is no escape, only the stark reality that every choice carries weight, and the collision between desire and danger is a lesson that cannot be ignored. When someone is forced to confront their own sins, the psychological unraveling can be both sudden and profound. Guilt is not a gentle emotion. It creeps in, settles, and then NDES, consuming every corner of thought and memory. The mind, once confident in its justifications and rationalizations, begins to fracture under the weight of truth. Every decision, every hidden act, every lie that seemed harmless, suddenly comes into sharp, unbearable focus. The person sees themselves in ways they had carefully avoided, and the self-image they once clung to, the identity of morality, control, or righteousness, begins to crumble. Anxiety tightens its grip, sleep becomes elusive, and the constant mental rehearsal of what-if scenarios takes over, leaving them trapped in an unending cycle of fear and self-recrimination. This unraveling is not merely emotional, it is cognitive, a deep reordering of how they understand themselves, their choices, and the consequences of those choices. Shame often joins guilt, creating a corrosive mixture that isolates the individual from those they love and from the parts of themselves they once trusted. The mind searches for excuses, distractions, or scapegoats, but the confrontation is relentless. There is nowhere to hide. Every interaction, every reflection, becomes a mirror of past misdeeds, and the internal narrative shifts from denial to a raw acknowledgement of wrongdoing. In this state, the psychological unraveling can paradoxically become a form of awakening. It forces an internal reckoning, a brutal clarity about patterns of behavior and the realities of personal responsibility. Though terrifying and destabilizing, this process can also lay the groundwork for transformation, compelling the individual to face their flaws, understand the consequences of their actions, and confront the uncomfortable truth that escaping one's own conscience is impossible. The unraveling strips away illusion, leaving only the stark, undeniable self. The moment the consequences of a single action become immediate, the fear that follows is unlike any other. Facing a sudden health scare, especially one that carries the potential to change life forever, forces a person to confront their own fragility in a way that abstract warnings or hypothetical scenarios never can. Panic floods the mind, sharp and unrelenting, as every possibility, each worse than the last, plays out in vivid detail. Thoughts race uncontrollably. What have I done? What does this mean for my life, my family, my future? The reality of the risk transforms even the most mundane surroundings into a landscape of tension and dread. Sleep becomes impossible, concentration impossible, because the mind is consumed by the what-ifs, imagining every potential consequence with relentless intensity. Alongside fear, shame often emerges, compounding the psychological impact. The person recognizes that this is not merely a physical threat, but also a moral reckoning, a moment where private choices have tangible, irreversible consequences. The body reacts in tandem with the mind, The stomach churns, the heart races. Every instinct screams for caution, for action, for some control over a situation that feels uncontrollable. Friends, family, and colleagues, once distant observers, suddenly feel like potential witnesses, each interaction loaded with the possibility of judgment or misunderstanding. The enormity of the situation presses down, forcing introspection that had been long avoided. There is a stark awareness that life as it was known may never be the same, and the permanence of the risk creates a profound vulnerability. In confronting this, the individual is stripped of illusions about invincibility or immunity. Fear becomes a teacher, relentless and unflinching, demanding acknowledgement of both the immediate danger and the deeper truths that reckless actions can bring into sharp, unavoidable focus. The ripple effect of hidden actions extends far beyond the individual who commits them, touching families, communities, and institutions in ways that are often unpredictable and devastating. One secret, kept in the dark, can spread through relationships like a silent wave, reaching people who had no involvement or awareness, yet who are nonetheless affected. Families feel the weight first, as trust is shattered and the foundations of love and security are shaken. Parents, children, and spouses may struggle to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the choices that have now come to light, creating emotional fractures that can take years to heal. Friends and colleagues, too, become collateral in the fallout, caught between loyalty, disbelief, and the need to distance themselves from scandal or danger. Within communities, particularly those bound by shared faith or moral values, the impact is magnified. The revelation that someone in a position of spiritual authority has acted in secrecy undermines collective trust, leading to cynicism, suspicion, and disillusionment. Congregations and social groups that once looked to a leader for guidance now question every word, every action, every motive, as the comfort of certainty is replaced by the anxiety of doubt. Institutions themselves are not immune. Their reputations, credibility, and influence can be compromised, often necessitating public explanations, disciplinary measures, or even systemic reforms to prevent similar betrayals. And yet, the ripple continues beyond immediate relationships. It seeps into conversations, whispers, and internal judgments, influencing perceptions long after the initial act is revealed. The hidden actions that were once a private indulgence or a forbidden impulse now become a catalyst for collective reflection, forcing everyone connected, directly or indirectly, to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, morality, and the fragility of human judgment. In this way, one secret can touch countless lives, reshaping social dynamics in profound and lasting ways. Denial, secrecy, and shame form a powerful triad that allows dangerous behavior to persist long after it should have been confronted. Denial acts as a protective shield, convincing the mind that actions are harmless, that consequences will never arrive, and that moral boundaries are flexible when no one else is watching. It whispers justifications, rationalizations, and excuses, masking the reality of wrongdoing with a comforting illusion. Secrecy reinforces this denial, providing the sense of control that comes from hiding actions from the world. Behind closed doors, decisions that would be condemned in the light of day feel private, isolated, and therefore, somehow permissible. The act of concealing wrongdoing breeds a false confidence, creating a dangerous feedback loop where the absence of immediate consequence is misinterpreted as proof of invulnerability. Shame, however, is the silent but relentless companion to both denial and secrecy. It lurks beneath the surface, turning internal guilt into self-loathing, fear of exposure, and emotional paralysis. Shame isolates the individual, preventing confession, accountability, or the seeking of help, while simultaneously intensifying the very behaviors it condemns. Together, these forces allow dangerous impulses to continue unchecked, as the person convinces themselves that nothing is wrong, that the world need not know, and that the internal anguish is tolerable. Over time, the weight of living a double life, of constantly hiding truth and managing perception, begins to erode mental and emotional stability. The individual becomes trapped, caught between the fear of exposure and the compulsion to continue behaviors that are destructive, both to themselves and to others. Denial, secrecy, and shame are not just psychological states, they are enablers of moralscandal decay, allowing private transgressions to fester until reality intrudes in the most unavoidable and often devastating ways. The sudden confrontation with mortality and vulnerability is a shock that strips life down to its most raw and undeniable truths. Most people move through life believing in a sense of invincibility, that danger is abstract, distant, or reserved for someone else. When a crisis arises, especially one tied to health or personal safety, that illusion evaporates instantly. The body and mind are forced to recognize fragility, and the awareness is both physical and psychological. Every heartbeat, every breath, becomes a reminder that life is finite and the future is uncertain. The vulnerability that accompanies such moments is not merely fear of death, it is the exposure of one's deepest weaknesses, the recognition that past decisions, impulses, and mistakes can carry consequences that no amount of planning, prayer, or avoidance can prevent. There is an acute awareness that control is limited, that the universe is indifferent to human desire or denial, and that survival often depends on confronting realities that were previously ignored or suppressed. This confrontation also brings profound self-reflection. The mind sifts through memories, choices, and relationships, weighing the meaning of actions against the stark backdrop of mortality. The intimacy of vulnerability is jarring. Suddenly, one is acutely aware of dependence on others, on medical intervention, on systems that operate outside one's control, and on the mercy of circumstance. It is a humbling and destabilizing experience, one that erodes arrogance and pretense. Yet, in the midst of fear, here is clarity. The confrontation with mortality forces a recognition of what truly matters, revealing values, priorities, and truths that are often obscured by the routines and distractions of daily life. Vulnerability, though terrifying, becomes a mirror, exposing the human condition in its most honest and transformative form. The power of accountability is both immediate and transformative, especially when truth can no longer be hidden. There comes a point when denial, excuses, and secrecy fail, and the individual is faced with the undeniable reality of their actions. Accountability is not merely the fear of punishment or judgment from others, it is the confrontation with oneself, the recognition that choices have consequences that cannot be erased. In this moment, the veneer of control dissolves, leaving only the stark clarity of responsibility. Every lie told, every boundary crossed, and every act of deception becomes a weight that cannot be shifted or ignored. The mind struggles against the reality, searching for loopholes, rationalizations, or ways to soften the blow, but accountability does not negotiate, it demands honesty. The transformative power lies in its ability to catalyze reflection and change. Once confronted with the consequences of their actions, individuals are forced to reassess patterns of behavior, motives, and ethical frameworks. They are compelled to ask difficult questions. Who have I hurt? What have I compromised? How do I reconcile my actions with my values? The exposure of truth can be devastating, stripping away comfort, pretense, and self-delusion, but it also carries the potential for profound growth. By facing the full weight of a coup, entability, a person is offered the rare opportunity to rebuild with authenticity and integrity, to realign actions with conscience, and to cultivate awareness that may prevent future harm. Communities and relationships, too, are affected, as accountability establishes a precedent for transparency, trust, and ethical responsibility. Ultimately, the confrontation with truth and the acceptance of accountability are not merely punitive, they are transformative forces that challenge individuals to confront the full measure of their humanity and the consequences of their choices. The human response to extreme crisis is rarely predictable, and it often reveals the depths of character in ways that ordinary circumstances never do. When a person faces exposure, danger, or the fallout of reckless actions, the reactions of those around them can vary dramatically, from compassion to judgment, from support to indifference. Some will step forward with empathy, offering guidance, forgiveness, or assistance, recognizing that mistakes do not erase the value of a person's humanity. These responses can be transformative, providing the individual with a lifeline, a mirror in which to see that even in error, they are not wholly condemned. Others may respond with harsh judgment, condemnation, or ostracism, driven by moral certainty, fear, or the need to distance themselves from scandal. This too shapes the person confronting the crisis, forcing them to navigate the emotional terrain of shame, guilt, and social consequence. Indifference is another possible reaction, a quiet withdrawal that can be just as devastating as active judgment, leaving the individual isolated and forced to face the full weight of their reality alone. In every case, these responses illuminate the social and emotional ecosystem in which humans exist, revealing how interconnected behavior, trust, and perception truly are. The individual at the center of the crisis experiences these reactions acutely, interpreting each gesture, each word, each silence as either validation, condemnation, or indifference. The awareness that others are watching, evaluating, and responding intensifies the psychological pressure, forcing reflection on both personal choices and their broader impact. Ultimately, human responses, whether compassionate, judgmental, or detached, serve as catalysts for self-realization. They provide feedback, whether harsh or supportive, that shapes how the individual confronts, processes, and ultimately transforms in the aftermath of crisis. These responses highlight that even in the darkest moments, the presence, reactions, and humanity of others play a critical role in shaping the path forward. Extreme crises have a way of forcing people to confront truths they have long avoided, and in doing so, they can catalyze transformation that is both profound and unavoidable. When a person faces the full weight of their actions, especially those that involve moral failings, hidden desires, or life-altering consequences, they are stripped of the illusions that once protected them. The comfortable narratives of self-justification, denial, or secrecy no longer hold. The mind can no longer hide behind rationalizations or distractions. In these moments, reflection becomes unavoidable. Every choice, every impulse, every hidden action is laid bare, demanding acknowledgement and reckoning. This confrontation with reality can be terrifying, but it also carries the potential for profound personal growth. It forces the individual to examine patterns of behavior, to question motives, and to consider the broader implications of their actions on others. Transformation often begins in discomfort. The initial shock, fear, or shame evolves into insight, self-awareness, and an understanding of responsibility that cannot be acquired through theory or casual reflection. Crises also illuminate priorities, values, and the fragility of life, pushing a person to reconsider what truly matters. In some cases, this awakening leads to meaningful change, corrective action, public accountability, or a renewed commitment to integrity and honesty. In other cases, it is a silent internal reckoning, a recognition of personal limitations, and a commitment to avoid repeating destructive behaviors. The key is that extreme circumstances remove pretense and force authenticity. What was once hidden or ignored is brought to light, and the individual must navigate the consequences. In this way, crisis serves as a catalyst, a crucible that exposes both flaws and potential, demanding transformation that is as unavoidable as it is transformative, shaping the person in ways that comfort and routine never could. The choices we make, even in secret, carry consequences far greater than we often imagine. One reckless act, one hidden desire, can ripple through lives, shatter trust, and confront us with truths we cannot escape. Yet, within that reckoning lies a rare opportunity, an opportunity to face reality, to confront our flaws, and to take responsibility in a way that transforms fear and guilt into awareness and growth. Life does not wait for us to be ready, it forces clarity through consequence. The strongest lesson is this: our actions define us more than our intentions, and integrity is built not in private moments of comfort, but in the courage to face the consequences of our choices, no matter how uncomfortable or frightening they may be. In the end, transformation is born from accountability, honesty, and the willingness to confront the truths we often try hardest to avoid.